She thought she owned the neighborhood. Rules, power, control, she wielded them like weapons. But one night, her obsession with authority turned into something far more sinister. A black man's home, the place where he should have felt safest, went up in flames. And just days later, the very woman accused of destroying everything he had dared to step into his courtroom, face to face with the man whose life she tried to erase. How does someone go from enforcing HOA rules to burning down a neighbor's home? And what happened when their worlds collided in public view? He was proud of the life he'd built. A quiet home on a tree-lined street, framed by years of sacrifice and late nights at work. For Marcus, it wasn't just a house. It was proof that resilience could outshine the barriers placed in front of him. His porch was where laughter lived. His living room where family gathered after long weeks. To neighbors and friends, he was steady, decent, and unshakably kind. But in communities like his, dignity has a way of drawing resentment. Just a few doors down, there was someone watching, someone who saw rules not as guidance but as power. An HOA board member with a reputation for petty complaints, a woman who believed control gave her worth. Little by little, her stares lingered longer, her words sharper, her reports more frequent. Marcus didn't know it yet, but that unease growing at the edges of his peaceful life was about to erupt into something unthinkable. The difference between a complaint and a crime was about to become shockingly clear. At first, it looked like neighborhood pettiness. Little notes slipped under his door, complaints about his grass being too tall, warnings that his trash can had been left out too long. Marcus rolled his eyes, fixed the so-called problems, and went on with life. But soon the tone sharpened. Each letter dripped with something heavier than rules. They weren't just about paint colors or lawn care. They were about him, his presence, his very right to belong, neighbors whispered. About the woman behind it all, an HOA board member whose name had become synonymous with control. She had threatened others before, but never like this. With Marcus, there was a different kind of venom. Comments about the kinds of guests who visited him, questions about whether he fit in with the neighborhood's so-called standards. The tension grew into confrontation. She lingered outside his home, arms folded, eyes narrowed, issuing complaints about nothing at all. When Marcus repainted his fence, she accused him of violating guidelines. When his nephew came over to play basketball in the driveway, she said it invited the wrong atmosphere. These weren't rules anymore. These were warnings. Then came the vandalism. A tire slashed in the night, his mailbox smashed in. Each time, Marcus reported it, hoping the system would protect him. Each time, nothing happened. Police scribbled reports, shook their heads, and moved on. The HOA dismissed him, siding with their board member as if her word carried more weight than his reality. He felt the walls closing in around his own home, but nothing prepared him for the night. Everything changed. It was late, the street quiet. Marcus had gone to bed after double-checking the locks, a habit he'd started forming ever since the harassment escalated. Hours later, he awoke to the acrid sting of smoke. At first it was faint, a haze in the air. Then he heard it, the crackle of flames. By the time he opened his front door, the sky glowed orange. Fire roared along his porch, creeping fast toward the windows. Heart pounding, Marcus stumbled through black smoke, coughing as the heat closed in. The house he worked years for, the one place he thought was safe, was collapsing in front of his eyes. Neighbors ran out into the street, some with phones, some frozen in shock. And through the chaos, a figure stood apart, calm, watching. The same woman who spent months trying to drive him out. Firefighters battled the blaze, but it was too late. His home was reduced to charred remains. Everything, photos, family heirlooms, history, turned to ash. But even in ruin, Marcus stood alive. And in that survival was a silent defiance. She had taken his house, but not his voice, and certainly not the truth, because what happened next shocked everyone. While neighbors whispered about who could have done such a thing, Marcus braced himself for a fight in court. Yet just days later, something unthinkable happened. The very woman accused of reducing his life to rubble walked confidently into his courtroom as if nothing had changed. The fire was only the beginning. What came after would expose not just her actions, but the cracks in a system that allowed her to believe she could get away with it. The courtroom was silent, heavy with the weight of everything Marcus had lost. He sat there, still carrying the smoke in his memory, the acrid reminder that home was no longer something he could touch. And then, the doors opened. The woman who haunted his nights, who neighbors whispered about, who stood still while his life burned, walked in without shame. Head held high, not in handcuffs, not hiding her face. She carried herself as though she were the victim. Marcus's heart hammered. Rage, grief, disbelief colliding all at once. How could someone strip him of everything and still walk boldly into the very room where justice was supposed to live? Around him, people leaned forward, whispering, unsettled. The system once again looked fragile. Would it protect him, or shield yet another entitled aggressor? As she took her seat, her eyes swept briefly to Marcus. That look was the moment he realized. To her, this wasn't destruction. It was domination. Burning his house hadn't silenced him. It was supposed to erase him. And standing in his courtroom was her way of showing she still believed she could win. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and suddenly Marcus wasn't just a man who lost a home. He was a black man, staring down a system that too often chose comfort for the powerful over justice for the vulnerable. His chest tightened, every nerve alive with the weight of history pressing down, daring him to believe justice could exist here. For a moment, it felt like the whole room held its breath. Would this space reflect the truth of what she had done? Or would Marcus, like so many before him, watch the flames spread from his house into the very core of justice itself? The answer was about to define far more than one man's loss. When the verdict finally came, Marcus felt the air rush from his chest. She was found guilty, not just of property destruction, but of the deeper act everyone in that courtroom understood, the attempt to erase a man's dignity because of his race. Yet, even with the gavel's strike, Marcus knew justice couldn't rebuild what the flames had taken. The ashes still whispered of family photos, heirlooms, and the comfort of safety that no sentence could ever replace. But his voice, that survived. By refusing silence, Marcus forced the truth into the open. Neighbors who had once looked away now had to confront what hatred looks like when it goes unchecked. His story rippled beyond that courtroom, exposing how fragile normal can be when bigotry is left to grow behind closed doors and HOA rules. The impact stretched far beyond one man and one house. Because Marcus's struggle wasn't isolated, it was a reflection of a system that so often bends to protect privilege instead of the vulnerable. And his victory, though bittersweet, became something more. A reminder that survival in the face of hate is itself an act of defiance. As the smoke cleared and the headlines faded, what remained was the question that lingers for all of us. How many more homes must burn? How many more lives must be scarred? Before we admit that racism doesn't just live in history books, it lives in neighborhoods, in systems, in silence. Marcus's story is not just about loss. It's a warning, a lesson, and above all, it's a call to see, to speak, to step in before the next fire is lit, because next time the flames may not leave room for survival.